John Lynch, I'm talking to you. You need to trade Jimmy Garoppolo right now. You need to trade him as soon as possible. You can't do it soon enough. I know I've flip-flopped on this issue a lot. When this offseason started, I said he can't be on this team. When you renegotiated his contract, i.e. cut his contract, cut his pay, and brought him back as a backup, I said, okay, I'm open-minded. Good to have a good backup. It's a net negative, and you know it. This is a circus. And you created it. This is no way to develop a young quarterback. And you know it. Because, first of all, you saw he lost one game in the rain, and the whole world came down on him and said he's terrible, needs to be benched. Former coaches, media guys. I mean, bench Trey Lance was the number one topic of conversation in the sports world. And I know you're going to say, oh, that's just noise. We don't listen to the noise. That's sure you don't, John. But what's most important is the noise inside your locker room. And you know that's real. You know that as long as Jimmy Garoppolo is on this team, all these players that went to the Super Bowl with him, that love him, that say they love him, that's their brother. Every time Trey misses a throw, every time Trey's voice cracks in the huddle, every time they lose, you got to know that a significant portion of your locker room is going to look at Jimmy like, why isn't he playing? Going to look at Kyle like, what are you doing? Going to look at you like, what are you doing? And so that means your team isn't 100% behind your quarterback. And that means your team is dysfunctional. Frankly, it means you don't have a team. If your team is split, you don't have a team. If your team isn't 100% behind its quarterback, you're not going to win. You lost week 1 to the Bears, who didn't beat themselves. They're behind their quarterback. Now you got to face the Seahawks. They suck, just like the Bears suck. But you know what? They're behind their quarterback. The Seahawks, who suck, are coming into this game confident. You know why? Because your team isn't behind your quarterback. You know what they're saying in Seattle? Most likely they're saying, it's a great time to face the Niners. Oh my God, this is great. They don't believe in their quarterback. They're fragile. All we got to do is get a lead on them early and they'll fold. They don't believe in themselves. They don't know that they can win with Trey. They want to go back to Jimmy. They're looking for an excuse to go back to Jimmy. Let's give them that excuse. You kidding? You're weak right now. You look weak. Teams want to face you. All because you created a ridiculous situation where Trey Lance has to look over his shoulder every day. He has to be perfect. He's not going to be perfect. And even if he is perfect wouldn't be good enough for a lot of the people on your own team. And if he loses week 2, how is your team going to react? If Jimmy's still here, if he loses to the Seahawks, how many people on your team are going to come to you privately in your office and say, John, what are we doing? Why are we not playing Jimmy? I want Jimmy. How many? Is that good? Is that the recipe for a Super Bowl? Is that the best way to make sure Trey Lance becomes the next Josh Allen? You spent 3 first-round picks on Trey Lance. You really want to pull the plug this quickly? Because you got Jimmy here. Let's back up. Frankly, you should have got rid of Jimmy as soon as you brought in Trey. But you said, no, it's cool. We're going to work it out. You said, it worked for Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, right? It can work. So let's look at that situation. Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers had for 3 years. But when the Packers decided it was time for Rodgers, go back. That was 2008. In 2007, the Packers were 13-3 with Brett Favre. They went to the playoffs. They won a playoff game. And then they decided, you know what? Rodgers is ready. Even though we got a Super Bowl roster, Super Bowl team, but Rodgers is ready. We're going to go to Rodgers. So Favre retired that offseason. Then he unretired and said he felt pressured by the Packers to retire, came back to the team, and the Packers were like, we don't want you. We made the decision to go with Rodgers, and now we're all in. We're not going to bring you back, and you can be the backup or compete. No, you're out. So what did they do? They traded one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, who was still good, coming off a great season, for a conditional 4th. Moved on. Gone. And you know what they did in 2008, the Packers? They went 6-10, missed the playoffs. Can you imagine if they had gone 6-10 with Rodgers on the team, with Favre on the team, excuse me. Can you imagine if he was lurking and they're losing? I mean, Rodgers in his 4th career start, week 4, at Tampa, loses by 9, 30-21, goes 14-27. That's 51% completion percentage for 165 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks, and a quarterback rating of 55. Can you imagine if Brett Favre was still on the team? he would have been starting week 5. Probably wouldn't have given the job back. And the Packers never would have known what they had in Aaron Rodgers. He might have left and been the greatest quarterback somewhere else. So actually just committing to Rodgers, making a decision and sticking with it was the best thing the Packers have ever done other than hire Vince Lombardi. Smartest decision they ever made other than hire Vince Lombardi. Went 6-10. No one was crying about it. That next year they were great. And then a couple years later, they won the Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers. So this is what you got to do. You can't show me a situation where a quarterback was successfully developed where the previous quarterback stuck around and the whole team wanted him to be the previous captain, guy who'd been a starter for 5 years. You can't keep him around. I was open-minded, but it's clearly a net negative. You can't let this happen. You got to trade him. If the Packers traded Brett Favre for a conditional 4th, trade Jimmy for a conditional whatever. Take your day 3 pick and move on. Move on. You know who was the Packers' backup quarterback in 2008? Matt Flynn. He was a rookie. He was 7th round pick. That's, Brock Purdy's good enough. Is he as good as Jimmy? No. Is he a good enough backup quarterback? Yes. If you go 6-11 this year, is it the end of the world? Not if you're good next year. Not if Trey Lance becomes the next Aaron Rodgers. And he's never going to get that opportunity if Jimmy's here and you bench him. So Jimmy's got to go, John. You got to take the loss on this one. The Packers did it with freaking – if they can trade a Hall of Fame quarterback for a conditional 4th, you can trade Jimmy for a conditional freaking 5th or 6th or 7th. Who cares? What you got to do is get your team behind Trey Lance or else he's going to fail. You're setting him up for failure and you know it. Got it, John? You're not even listening to me, are you? Kyle, would you tell him that I'm right? You know I'm right. Kyle, you know I'm right. John, you disagree. Kyle, you know I'm right. John, you should know better too, man. What successful team that you were on ever had a situation like this? Where a bunch of the vets are being like, can we please play the backup who can't win the playoffs? Who can't win the Super Bowl? Can't happen. Trade Jimmy Garoppolo as soon as possible. You know one other thing too? You know when Trey was at his best this offseason? In OTAs and minicamp. You know what's interesting about that time? That's when Jimmy wasn't there. Ever since you brought him back and he's been lurking, Trey's been inconsistent. Isn't it your job to put Trey in the best position to be successful? Do that. Having a good backup quarterback, putting the entire weight of the world on Trey Lance after 2-3 starts. What you want to do? What's more important? Having a good backup? Trey developing into the next Josh Allen or Aaron Rodgers? What's more important? The development of your quarterback or having a good backup? Come on, John. Make the smart decision.